And you are live.
Great, thank you. Good morning. This is the meeting on November 9th at 10 o'clock of the Joint Fiscal Committee. All of our members are here in person, but for Senator Sears, who is joining us remotely, thank you very much for being with us, Senator Sears. And committee
Thank you.
And members who are here, thank you for being here. Congratulations on all of those who are returning. And the rest of us will try not to be too gleeful in thinking about our next lives and the work that you'll be doing here when we're not here. The first item on the agenda is approving the minutes. Trust that everybody's had a chance to read them. And
So moved.
okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
And Senator Westman seconds. Any further discussion? If not, call it's voice. Yeah. Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm abstaining. I wasn't.
You weren't here.
I wasn't.
Yeah. So you've got that one abstention with. Yeah. Okay.
Just got it.
All righty. And then
But I would say they were very detailed, and so even though I wasn't here.
you felt like you had been.
Okay.
Yeah. The next item on the agenda is the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive Program. You'll recall that we received a report on that last meeting with a request to expand the LMA. Can't remember what the L stands for. Labor market area. We are in receipt of a letter from Governor Scott as well as the Agency of Commerce and Community Development informing us that they are not requesting that we expand that grant opportunity, and there is, or that opportunity, not a grant. And that there is a more detailed explanation of the review that they did at our request and why they're withdrawing that. And that's in our packet. This is not a motion item. It's just they are just informing us, and I wanted just to kind of complete the circle since we had postponed action on that. So unless there are questions or discussion, I'm ready to move on to the next item, which is, yes, we're going to be joined remotely by Tim Ash, the Deputy State Auditor, to review the federal single audit review. Hi, Mr. Ash. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Good morning. And I will just turn this over to you. We have in our packets the report. And with that, let me just turn it over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Tim Ash, Deputy State Auditor. I'm going to make just a couple brief comments because you have both the single audit and the summary of previous year findings and the ongoing responses to them in your packet. I guess the high level summary here is, as you'll see, there are a significant number of additional material weaknesses, which is the most serious finding in an audit. By comparison, there's really two components to the single audit. There are the financial findings, and then there are compliance findings. In 2020, there were 2 material weaknesses found on the financial side and 3 significant deficiencies. A material weakness basically means that it is unlikely that an error in the financial statements would be detected or prevented or corrected. A significant deficiency is basically a little bit below that threshold. It's a problem. It should be reported to management, but it doesn't rise to the level of a material weakness. So there were 2 material weaknesses in 2020 and 3 significant deficiencies. This year, roughly the same overall picture, 3 material weaknesses, so an increase in 1 and only 1 significant deficiency. So You can look for the specific issues in the report, and we can always come back and talk about anything specific there. On the compliance side is where you'll see the real volume change. Whereas there had been 2 material weaknesses in 2020, you'll see that there are 10 in this the FY21 single audit. The number of significant deficiencies has risen from 9 to 14. So those are not good signs overall. It means that the agencies will be spending a lot more time with auditors re-reviewing a number of these findings, and puts a lot of pressure on the staff to be cleaning up some of the internal controls and processes to avoid this in the future. There were also 7 qualified opinions for programs, the various federal programs, which is up from just 3 in FY20's single audit. The UI program, the CHIP program, and the Medicaid cluster are the repeat qualified programs. So they were the only ones in 2020. They reappear in 2021. The additional 4 in FY21 include the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, Title I Education Funds, the Epidemiology Lab, and the Disaster Assistance Program. So that's the snapshot of the increased level of findings of both the material nature and the significant deficiencies. If I were to flag 2 things for you, not to the exclusion of all other things, but just to accentuate them. One is you'll see the Department of Labor is really the only department or agency who doesn't merely accept the findings of the audit and the audit team, but has a rather lengthy explanation of why they have not met the relevant standards for controls. And I would just direct you to read those statements. They communicate their prioritization during the pandemic of getting money out the door to beneficiaries, and above quarterly reports and things that are just normal course of business. But in addition to that, and possibly more concerning, is their repeated statement that they don't have the resources to comply with the federal requirements, which result in a number of these findings. And that is something I think that either this committee or the standing committees come January may want to spend some time thinking about, because otherwise we'll continue to see labor showing up on these audits in the substantial way that they are. The second issue is kind of detectable in this report, but also from the ongoing work of our auditors with the different agencies over the year, is that staffing issues in the financial and business offices at the agencies is becoming a real challenge. We repeatedly hear in our weekly meetings that this business manager or that has moved from one agency to another or has left state government, and the real turbulence that causes in terms of compliance. It has in fact almost jeopardized the state's ACFR, the annual comprehensive financial reports, from getting out on a timely basis this year. And I think you'll find when you talk to agencies that they are struggling to keep and recruit people for these key financial and compliance management positions, which are absolutely critical. Otherwise, programs get re-audited, there's additional expense and so on. So that staffing issue is a broader government-wide concern, but I think as you read the audit, which if you haven't already, I'll strongly encourage it. I think you'll pick up a bit of a note in there that the staffing concerns, which people know full well across the workforce, have added some extra pressure in this particular area. So food for thought for the committee. So I'll leave it there. And if you have questions, I'm happy to field them.
Thank you, Mr. Ash. Committee members, do you have any questions for the Deputy Auditor? Representative Fagan.
Mr. Ash, thank you for the presentation. Did you, other than the staffing issues as an overarching reason for some of the material weaknesses and deficiencies, were there any other that you found? Overarching, reasons that kind of been there a long time, whatever.
Yeah, I think I'll point out one, which is perhaps so obvious I failed to mention it, which is COVID clearly factors into some of what you see in this single audit report. The intensity of additional funds coming in required standing up new programs. So some of this, emergency rental assistance as an example, that's not a year-to-year program that's existed in state government for decades, and would be a particularly concerning to suddenly see it drop off the compliance platform. So, but nonetheless, the COVID, I don't want to use the word excuse, but explaining many of these things away merely by saying COVID put a lot of stress on people, while it might help explain some of it, doesn't solve the problem. And so staffing really is the big issue, but obviously COVID's overarching pressure is certainly something we have to put this in some context.
Thank you.
Members, are there, Senator Kitchell?
Thank you. One of the reasons we brought these findings here to this committee was to, in recognition that when you have the repeat findings on the cost and the extent to which they're have been remedied or not remedied. So it appears that my note is the areas where we continue to have audit findings are the three that you identified. There were some new ones, but UI, CHIP, and the Medicaid cluster. Is that those are the ones where we're seeing kind of a continuation of the audit findings from audit finding.
That's exactly right. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? So I have one, which is, and I am not at all surprised by your observation around sufficient staffing. Thank you very much for highlighting that. And it certainly is a matter that I think we need to consider. I'm curious, and this is a question probably for HR rather than you, but do you have any insight as to why folks are moving around? Are we just not paying enough to retain people within state government? Or, as I said, do you have any insight?
Well, other than Joint Fiscal Office itself stealing some of the best and brightest executive branch.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah.
I think
That doesn't go with
what we've heard from some of the leadership at departments and agencies is that as they're trying to recruit people for some of these key positions, they're losing them at the last second, either to a Vermont, private entity, to some other, agency of either the federal government or local government. Presumably pay factors in, but not always. And I think there's merely been some retirements in key positions. There have been others who have left one agency to go to another, only to be pleaded with to return. So just that constant sense of pressure at that level on the financial side right now, HR and finance and management really do have to figure out how to create some stability. And I would again repeat that I think the Department of Labor, because of its recurrence of its presence in these kinds of reports and findings, is probably a place that merits the highest consideration.
Representative Brooklyn, thank you.
I don't want to grasp at straws here, but something that I noticed as kind of an overlap of each of the areas that were identified in this report that are kind of a future concern in state government are the IT investments in these different areas. And is there any nexus between some of the challenges of upgrading IT, whether it's in the UI system, whether it's over some of our healthcare spending, that connect with some of these challenges in the financial management area?
Well, for certain, using the UI example, I think is a good place to start. Among the challenges that are flagged in one of the material weaknesses is the failure of the department to properly verify the eligibility of people applying for UI during the pandemic. The department in part says, well, we don't have a modernized IT system, which would have facilitated that. So certainly there is a relationship to either delayed investments in IT or investments that haven't included the kind of features that would guarantee compliance. So there's certainly an element there in the UI project, as you all know very well, because you've all voted, I believe, to fund it. That project is underway, but will take a number of years. So trying to find a way to start moving the dial on the investments that are overdue while guaranteeing compliance in the meantime seems to be a real issue that ADS and finance and management are going to have to work together to figure out.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Ash? I'm not seeing any. We certainly appreciate your time with us. I think this is valuable and sets the table for some work that the relevant committees in the House and Senate need to be attending to as we move forward. We need to be properly supporting those entities and state government to do their work to the levels that we expect. So thank you very much for that. This is not an action item. So I think we're ready to move on to the next. See you around. So the next item on the agenda is the regional dispatch funding. Again, we have received in our packets and previously a report from the Department of Public Safety and are joined here now by the commissioner. I think I can see her name on the screen at least. Commissioner, are you ready to join us to review your report with us? Commissioner Morrison? We are a minute or two. We are 2 minutes early. So,
oh wow.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can
Give her a
help her.
Yeah. While we're waiting, yeah.
A quick question while we're waiting. Are we having, is there going to be another joint fiscal committee meeting before the end of the year?
There may well need to be based on what we're hearing about the emergency rental assistance program. And I know that you have to leave us at 11. I'm really grateful that you managed to be with us for the first hour.
Right.
I was thinking that maybe we should do a doodle poll to find out when folks are available, because I've heard, I was hoping we could find a time when people were in the building for other business, but that may not work. But so my thought was a doodle poll.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but probably another meeting.
Yeah, it seems that may be necessary to move the money around in the emergency rental assistance program, the ERAP program.
There she is.
Yeah. Hi, Commissioner. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time this morning. And we were hoping that you could walk us through the recommendations of DPS with regard to the regional dispatch funding.
Yes, I can do that.
Oh, she's got two devices on.
Oh, and you may need to mute one of your devices. We're getting a little feed. Whoops.
Oh, no.
Now we've lost her.
We're all out of kind of practice for how we do this work on Zoom. So let's just give her a moment.
Are you able to hear me on Mandy Worcester's?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm going
We can
to start.
hear you, but we can't see you. There you go.
Oh.
Well done.
We got one.
It's a struggle moving between the home environment and the office environment with the different technologies, but here we are, alas.
We name her.
Good morning and thank you. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please. You may not have heard. We were hoping that you would give us an overview of your proposal, an explanation of why we've landed where you're proposing to land.
Yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to. For the record, my name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont. And after 53 years of false starts and countless studies, DPS is pleased to present the first piece of what will be a multi-part plan for the future of regional communications. If it pleases the chair, I'd like to quickly run through key components of the memo that we sent dated October 25th, and then offer a couple of thoughts and leaving time for questions. I recognize that we only have 20 minutes allotted, so I intend to do a relatively high-level overview of the memo and a couple quick thoughts. Would that be all right?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you see in the memo, the state of Vermont provides dispatch services to approximately 81 non-state emergency responding agencies. And quite candidly, across our two PSAPs in Westminster and Williston, it is the complexity of work is too high and the volume of work is too high. We have long envisioned a state, a more dispersed or diffused state solution to emergency services dispatches. And as you know, there have been numerous efforts to make this come to fruition since the 60s, and none of them have worked. So we're seeking the release of a limited amount of the funding from the big bill, the budget bill last year, H740, to support the creation or expansion of regional emergency communication centers to broaden the capacity and capability of existing centers. So it's a twofold approach. One is to build new centers. The other piece of the approach is to expand centers that have been operating in this fashion for a long time. So we're not creating a plan from scratch. We are in some cases hoping to expand existing resources and develop others. You can see at the top of page 2 that there was a project application timeline that was managed through the Department of Public Safety. And there was a working group convened that did an initial review and scoring of all of the projects that were submitted. The original results and the members of that working group can be found later in the memo on pages 5 and pages 7. What we are bringing to you today is a recommendation found on page 2. You'll see a red line that says phase 1 projects. And we propose to bring 5 projects, sort of kick them into play to expand their ability to take on agencies. For instance, the Orange County Sheriff's Office already dispatches for multiple entities, as does Hartford PD. So some of these projects are growing their capacity. And in the case of the town of Colchester and the Rutland County Sheriff's Department, it's more of a build out from the ground up. These are projects that are regionally diverse so that we can benefit from drawing from available workforce in different regions of the state, providing a greater pool of human resource to draw from. And they're also projects of different size and structure, for lack of a better word. Different types of projects. So this recommendation also includes a request for contracting services for a project manager for this effort, this initiative going forward, as well as a technical consultant. We've laid that out in the memo. I'd be happy to explain more if we need to go into greater detail about why those 2 positions are integral to making this rollout successful. So when we look at the first recommendations, we look at, as I said, being regionally diverse, being able to draw from workforce in other parts of the state. But I also look at this, and our team looked at this as how do we avert the looming crisis in our own 2 PSAPs, which support a large portion of the emergency call taking and dispatching needs in the state. It is not a secret that particularly our Westminster PSAP is carrying approximately a 40% vacancy rate in staffing, 48. 48% vacancy rate. We are struggling to hire, but more importantly, we are struggling to retain people. And in exit interviews to a person, they mention the complexity of the work. There are too many agencies being dispatched out of that center in particular. We have already taken internal measures to transfer certain responder agencies up to our Williston PSAP to try and balance the call load. But the reality is that our 2 PSAPs have too many agencies for which we are trying to provide service. So that the recommendation we bring to you today is to fund these 5 projects totaling just over $2 million. You'll also see on page 1 that in italics that we're requesting the flexibility to reassign funds. If one of these top 5 agencies that we have brought forward indicates to us that they are unable to move forward in the expected time frame, which would be to begin to flip the switch and take calls within 12 months, that we would like the flexibility to come back to repurpose that money for projects on the list that are in a position to do that in a faster fashion. It should be noted that all 11 of the projects that are listed are projects that we believe are important. We believe they should be funded, but it's not a no, it's a not yet, because kicking all of these projects into play without a project manager and a technical consultant is too much. We don't have the bandwidth to manage it. And there's some work that needs to be done in terms of accountability and making sure that these projects are fully prepared before we pass the money through to them. So there are certain tasks that we would give to the project manager and the technical consultant that would need to be completed before that money would actually be passed through. And in some of these, it might be very quickly, it could be a matter of weeks, and in others, it might take longer. With that being said, I want to make sure that we're framing our requests appropriately, which is that we are not, the state of Vermont, particularly DPS, is not undertaking an IT project. We are supporting a workload balancing initiative. And more importantly, we are trying to prevent the collapse of our PSAPs that are currently dispatching for too many agencies. We expect that these projects that receive funding will be ready to go within 12 months. And the overall goal is that before January 1st of 2025, that all non-state agencies will be transitioned to a regional dispatch center. That the only entities we would be dispatching for are state entities and any agency that we are contractually obligated to provide services for. We are committed to assisting agencies in finding a solution that works for them. At the same time, we need to prod agencies and strongly encourage them to prepare for the transition and seek assistance as needed. There are clearly some communities that have, I guess, hoped to wait this out, is for lack of a better word, that if they wait long enough, this will go away, as it has other times in the last 53 years. We have fielded questions about governance. The request for proposal that went out required applicants to have a governance structure. And as you can imagine, in Vermont, governance takes many forms at the county and local level. It is not the state's intention to dictate any particular form of governance. Local control is exactly that. It is local. Another task of the project manager would be to work with projects that perhaps need to clarify either their contracting status, because some of these projects that exist currently use contracts to provide dispatching service for communities, or to help them develop a governance structure if it's going to be a different type of regional center. I think I will stop there. We did prepare some potential language for a motion. I believe you have it. If you don't, I'd be happy to drop it in the chat. But let me stop there in the interest of time and see if there are questions that I can answer.
I think there are a variety of questions. Senator Baruth?
Thank you. I'm wondering about the language that requests up to an additional 230,000, and I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense of how that particular figure was reached.
Are you talking about in the italics where we requested the additional 230,000 without the need to seek additional JFO approval?
Yeah.
That was an estimate that we ran looking at the numbers of the projects that are below the line, the first phase line. That if there was a project that did not, that they said they weren't ready to go within 12 months, that we felt that if that happened to be one of the smaller amounts, like the 119 or the 330, that absent that 230 buffer, we wouldn't have other projects that we could meaningfully fund. Now, obviously, if one of the larger projects, if the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority came to us and said, we're not going to be ready to go in 12 months, that's a lot more money to be able to fund other projects. We were just concerned that if it was one of the smaller projects that said we can't go, that it wouldn't be enough to meaningfully move another project forward.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, Senator Sears and then Rep. Kornheiser and Fagan.
Yeah, Commissioner, I can't do my video, but that's okay. You don't need to see me. I'm concerned. I need an answer to a couple of questions. One is why Rutland County Sheriff's Department can handle 32 agencies, 321,000 for this, funding request, and the town of Colchester is one agency for 757,000, both ranked application score the exact same. And the second question is the city of Montpelier, the 2.4 million. I've heard a lot of concern about that. Can you specifically address some of the concerns that we've gotten emails about?
Sure. Let me start with the first one, Senator, please. And it's great to talk with you, and I understand the video struggles. Trust me, I'm there. The projects that were recommended for funding were based solely on what the projects asked from us. We did not give them a limit. We didn't. We were kind of surprised that the Rutland project came in so low. That being said, I know that they also applied for funding under a Homeland Security grant. So there is a different stream of funding that Rutland is already benefiting from. But even that, all told, it's not the amount that I would have expected to see from their request. So I can't answer for you why they aren't asking for more money. I can tell you that the Chittenden County project is unique in that they're starting something from scratch. They've built a governance structure. They are at a different stage of the project. They've already begun in Chittenden County acquiring consoles and equipment. So different projects are finding their own path forward, and the 321,724 is the total amount that Rutland sought from this RFP, and I can't tell you why it's so much smaller.
But I'm trying to. You said that the Colchester was one. It says one agency, so I'm assuming that's just the town of Colchester.
Oh,
is
no,
going
sir.
to have their own.
No,
That's
sir.
what I'm concerned with. No?
No. That's the number of agencies moved away from currently receiving dispatch services from VSP. So in Chittenden County, we have a lot of agencies that already dispatch for themselves. Essex, Colchester, Burlington, South Burlington, these all have their own standalone dispatch centers. The Chittenden County project proposes to incrementally bolt on all of those communities and bring them together, plus hopefully bring on, I could get in the weeds on why they can only take one. That one agency was Williston, but.
I think I understand now.
Okay.
I think I understand now. I'm just, it's been so long since I've been able to visit Chittenden County. It's so far up there that I may have missed that.
We say that about Bennington being south, but and as to your concerns or your questions, sir, about the
concern about the city of Montpelier, the 2.4 million, is that I've gotten an awful lot of emails, and I've also had a conversation with a couple of people who are really concerned about this project not being ready for 2.4 million, and which is a huge chunk of the total amount that the legislature put aside.
Yes, sir. I can tell you that, again, this is not a no, it is a not yet in terms of the priorities for funding, because members of my team and I also need to have a better understanding of how the proposal we received through the RFP process meshes with what is now probably a decades-long initiative through the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. And that was not completely clear to us. I'm also clear that there's some leadership changes happening in Central Vermont. So it is not a project that is unworthy. It's a project that we need to dig a lot deeper before we can responsibly pass state funds through to it. And that is exactly why we need a project manager and a technical consultant to gain this information and sit down with the stakeholders in the proposed project. And if it is not the same direction that the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority has been going, we need to reconcile that. So there's a lot of questions around that project. It is a desperately needed project, but it was not crystallized for us enough to feel comfortable bringing it to you for funding right now. But I think it is a absolute case in point of why we need a little more human resource to do some deeper dives on some of these projects before we pass money through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep. Kornheiser, then Fagan, and then Ansel.
I fear I have a few too many questions, and so I might ask one or two of them and then circle back if someone else doesn't ask them. My first question is just what the criteria was to evaluate these proposals. I didn't see that.
It's part of the Homeland Security grant application process, and that those documents can be made available to you, but it's a pretty long, lengthy process that was undertaken by a group and the members of that working group or the evaluation group are listed for you on page 5.
Yeah, I saw that. So the application scores were from a Department of Homeland Security criteria?
Well, the application scores followed the same process, the same, shall we say, process that we would use to fund Homeland Security priorities. But of course, the particular criteria are different. It's not the same as if you're evaluating something to combat violent domestic extremists. So
that's what I figured. So I was curious about the actual criteria that was used for the score.
I was not on the scoring group, but I can.
I would love to see that. That would be helpful for me. Thank you. And then my second question is sort of a little broader, and it's trying to understand better how this fits into the big picture of the goals that you're moving towards. So I know that in the power and duties, we're looking at an eventual statewide plan eventually, and how current services are funded and delivered, and then sort of what we're moving towards. And so I'm trying to see how these initial grants would bring us towards a plan where dispatch services were being covered sufficiently statewide. And sort of one example, like very specific example that I have related to that is some of Senator Sears' questions about how much one agency was getting versus another. I understand that some agencies are perhaps underbidding their services, or maybe that is sufficient, but whether you had an opportunity to evaluate whether they would be able to sufficiently deliver the services with the amount of funds or the structure that they asked for.
So we certainly don't have the resource to do that right now. These are transition funds. That's specifically, I want to make sure that we're not conflating the fact that there's this seed funding that Commissioner Sherling asked for, and that there is a separate but parallel path that the working group has been tasked in legislation to come up with a long-term funding source. Okay, so there's a difference between seed money to get projects functional and how we're going to alleviate any tax burden or address that statewide in the future. These are projects that have come to us saying they want to provide regional dispatching. And that's what this $11 million is intended to do, is get them out of the gate, get them consoles, get them chairs, get them the whatever infrastructure they need. Each project is going to look a little bit different. There is no cookie cutter approach. And there is not in my estimation, there is no request from the legislature or even an appetite at the state level to have the state come in and say, this is what dispatching services are going to look like all across the state. That completely defies the notion of local control, and it completely goes against the system that is already in place. I need to remind you, is already in place. We have our 2 state-run PSABs. We have multiple standalone centers, such as the ones I've already mentioned, and we have multiple, for lack of a better word, regional communication centers in St. Albans, Shelburne, Lamoille, Hartford, where they are already dispatching for 5 to 15 entities and sometimes more. So this is an effort to grow some of those, bring together some of the ones such as in Chittenden County, and shed agencies out of the 2 state-run PSAPs. There is no grand plan for exactly where 10 centers will be located and exactly which towns will get their service from there. To some degree, the way this is envisioned and the way we're moving is going to be a bit of a, shall we say, a capitalist system. Whichever regional centers are providing the best service to their clients, which are first responder agencies and towns, are the ones that are going to get more business. So to some degree, we are creating a bit of a competitive atmosphere where you want to provide, you are incented to provide outstanding service so that those agencies will come to you for service provision.
Thank you. I think the crux of what I'm trying to understand long-term is that, so with our school system, we have local control, but we also have the Agency of Education ensuring that we have equal or equitable access to education for all Vermonters across the state. So we balance that local control with sort of a state level planning process to some degree. And so what I'm trying to understand is how these seed projects will fit into a long-term vision to ensure that every Vermonter is going to have access to emergency services. And what I hear you saying is that we haven't really gone far enough along in a long-term planning process to see how these seed projects might fit into that. But these seed projects are sort of relieving some of the emergency burden that you're experiencing at the Vermont State Police.
Right. So I think that's a relatively fair assessment. However, remember, the working group has been tasked with determining the long-term funding going forward. There is this bigger question that if you're trying to create an overlay over all of the dispatching services or centers, my point to that is that the system's already working, with the exception of the fact that too many agencies are concentrated in the 2 state-run PSAPs. And there has never been a need indicated that there is some portion of the community or state that is not getting equitable dispatching services. The way the system is currently running, there has not been a hue and cry that we need to have an overlay such as the Agency of Education over local school boards and promulgating certain rules. We are taking the same number of users of the system, same number of first responder agencies, and we are more equitably distributing the number of agencies being dispatched into different regional centers. We're not creating some new level of governance over either municipality-owned dispatch entities or the folks who are already acting as de facto regional communication centers.
I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner. I think we might have a difference of opinion about the problem that we're trying to solve, and some of that fault might lay with how we actually asked you to solve the problem. So thank you very much.
Right. No, we're trying to follow the rules. We've been given.
I appreciate that. I absolutely do.
So.
Representative Fagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, thank you for coming in today. I've got 3 questions. One is overarching. I'm going to ask that last. The other 2 are questions to understand what you've presented to us. You spoke about and I'm just only going to talk about the 5 organizations that are above the line in phase 1. You spoke, or you presented that the town of Colchester has had to reduce their request by a little over $2 million because other things do not fall within the funding allowed requirements. Are they capable of actually standing up an answering center, given the fact that we've reduced their funding by over $2 million? Is it feasible?
The short answer to that is yes, that I have had conversations with the folks who are spearheading that project. And that they, quite simply, the application that they provided had unallowable costs. They were blatantly unallowable. So the review team axed them, and that's notated in this report that you have. Obviously, you've read the footnote that we provided on that. So the short answer is yes, they have the ability to continue to move forward with their project. Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of any one project about, having been a local police chief, I'm keenly aware that what is true in November may not be true in March after town meeting or when your budget gets passed or whatever. But to answer your question, I had conversations directly with the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority folks after this revised number came out and was told that they could still move forward.
That you just answered a next question that I was going to ask based as a follow-up. So thank you. My next question goes to the timelines of the 5 projects. 2 of the 5 projects are beyond your 12-month timeline. In Rutland County's, let's face it, it is 12 months. One small little hiccup, and that gets bumped off the phase 1 list. Are they prepared to do this, or are they actually putting this out there as a means of getting on the start, getting to the start line and being funded?
Again, I can't speak to too many details. I don't want to represent that I can speak on behalf of any project. I can't. I can tell you that they have shown a keen interest in advancing their project as quickly as possible. And we have offered funding to the full amount of funding that they sent to us as their ask. One of the reasons why we feel it's imperative to bring on a project manager is to be able to take a deeper dive with these projects and assist them as necessary, stealing best practices from other sites that have been successful, not allowing people to step in the same pitfalls that have happened in other projects, and to really help be an accelerator, a project accelerator. So that's one of the reasons why we need this project manager. The Rutland County project is one that, of course, would have very meaningful impact on easing the burden in our Westminster PSAP. So we're firmly committed to helping move that along as quickly as is responsible. So that's the best answer I have for you, is that each project, every single project is going to be different and move at a different pace. What I know is that kicking all 11 projects into play at the same time is going to be mayhem. That's why we're coming to you with a staggered approach, and we hope to come back in 4 to 6 months. In 4 to 6 months, we might find out that we didn't move forward on 1 or 2 of these projects above the line, and that other ones have come to the forefront as being really ready to roll. And in that time frame, hopefully we would have hired the consultant and technical consultant and project manager, and we probably would have a lot more information for you on your questions about the City of Montpelier or Central Vermont project, et cetera. There are some parts of this that are beyond our ability to resource. We don't have the horses in the barn here at DPS to take a deep dive on some of these projects right now.
I understand what you're saying. I understand that there's a lot of things that need to be done here, and the technical expertise does not necessarily rely within your department, because this is a format that we probably haven't had for 10 years. So we need to get this done. So go ahead, because I want to ask my overarching question.
Okay, go ahead. I just want to say that the technical expertise, this is not going to be, I don't think we're going to find out anything there's not going to be any big revelations. What we need really to do is make sure that a person with eyesights on all the projects and their needs is ensuring that we are being responsible with state money, not overbuilding a system, but allowing for piggybacking on any existing state resources that are already out there, while also building appropriate redundancy and failovers, but not overbuilding, not double building a system just because multiple projects perceive that they need X, or because some giant national vendor tells them they need to build, $800,000 worth of infrastructure. We need somebody to make sure that there is proper redundancy and failover, and use of existing state assets to make the project holistically sound, but not to build one statewide system. That is not the intent.
I've always been a firm believer in project manager concept, especially when the project manager doesn't change until the project is complete. So,
that would be my hope.
So my overarching question, if we defer action on this to the legislature such that they would take action, what in your opinion would occur given what you've already told us about Westminster? Are we going to be able to, to take all the emergency calls in a timely enough manner? And one point in time, I knew what the call time to pick up was supposed to be. And are we going to be able to dispatch in a timely enough manner?
I'm going to let Captain Burnham, who is sitting nearby, give me a couple talking points on that, because I don't want to get ahead of myself. But here's what I can tell you from a project standpoint. I've been working on the concept of regional dispatch since I was a lieutenant, the executive officer at Burlington PD, and that's a long time ago. And this is the furthest we've gotten down the road towards making this a reality. And it is a necessary reality to show proof of concept of different structures. So as I said, the Chittenden County project is a very different project than Lamoille County or Orange County. And I think there is room for all of these types of projects in Vermont. I think there's an appetite for local first responder agencies to have some say in what type of relationship they want to have to their dispatching authority. We've already decreased the level of service that we can provide out of our PSAPs. For instance, we gave a hard deadline, I think it was November 1st, that we no longer answer business calls. A lot of police departments in particular, but also EMS and fire departments would forward their phones to our PSAPs for regular business calls if nobody was in the office. And we've already had to stop that because we can't handle that type of call volume. So we're going to continue to have to peck away at the level of service that we provide to these first responder agencies. I mean, be clear, somebody is always going to be there to answer the 911 calls. We hope that we can pick them up in a timely manner and they don't roll over. But when they do roll over, they roll over onto the smaller regional entities like Shelburne and St. Albans and Lamoille County, and it can quickly overwhelm a smaller regional comm center. So, I can't predict the future other than to say that it doesn't impact just the Vermont State Police. It affects anyone in the 911 call taking system. Delaying action, at least action that gets us further down the road, I think would be really devastating for our ability to retain the people we do have, recruit new people. This has been the carrot that's been dangling out there, is that we're going to be trying to get folks some relief. The system is changing. We are shedding agencies. And I think that sending this to the legislature, which is going to take a lot of work, we're not afraid of hard work, be very clear. I feel like we've done most of the work. It's a matter of sharing it with people, but it's going to add 6 months minimum to getting the first tangible steps forward. So I would recommend against it. I would recommend that, obviously the motion we brought to you is for $2.2 million to be authorized. It does not mean that we will put it on the street. It means that we will urgently try to hire a project manager, a technical consultant. If it's 6 weeks later that we're able to buy the equipment and pass through the money for the Orange County Sheriff's Department to buy the equipment they need, that's a quick fix, and that should not be delayed. If the Rutland County project is much more complex, which I know it is, and we can't responsibly put money on the street for 4 to 6 months, then we won't. I mean, to some degree, this is a chicken or the egg. We need the project manager and the technical consultant so that we know what we need to know in order to responsibly put the money on the street. But I think halting all progress is going to be a tremendous blow to our ability to retain our staff at our PSAPs and to recruit new staff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Representative Kornheiser?
I have Janet's question as well as my question, which I'm going to ask first. Procedurally, can we release the funding for their project manager folks and not release the grant funding? The rest of the grant funding?
I believe that it would be up to us to describe what it is that we want to do. Or you could go the other way and fund everybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that is within our jurisdiction, as I understand. Yeah.
And then Representative Ansel's question is about how would this sort of private sector regional dispatch system, would we be making progress towards smaller towns and the costs of dispatch that they are currently subject to, and sort of imagine that under a more competitive model, they might be subject to ever increasing costs for dispatch?
So two thoughts on that. One is, please remember there's a working group that is parallel and working on that report that is due December 1st about recommendations on how that's funded. That is not within my office's purview. It's a separate working group. The second point I want to make sure that the committee is aware of is that before COVID, Commissioner Sherling very clearly communicated out to the field of the first responder community, and I believe with the legislature, about the fact that we needed to change the decades-long inequity in some towns paying for dispatch services and some towns not, that it had to change. There had to be equity across the system. There were many, many legacy agencies that had been receiving dispatch services for free, and others that were being asked to pay, and that's not okay. So there was already a robust discussion underway about finding a new way to fund dispatch, and in parallel, a way to load balance. Let's put the elephant on the table. Consolidating from 4 PSAPs to 2 not only gave us much less workforce to draw from, but it smashed a whole pile of agencies under one roof that raised the complexity of work to an untenable level. So, some folks have said, well, is the answer just to go back to 4 PSAPs? And I don't believe that's the answer. I believe the answer is to put the dispatching into the local region in the whatever construct makes sense to the users, consumers in that area. I know I didn't answer your question about ongoing price hikes, but that is a separate parallel track that I just don't have an answer for you on.
Thank you.
Senator Kitchell?
Yeah, I realize we've had a lot of discussion, but I want to bring it back because this was something we talked about in Senate Appropriations, and Senator Sears was critical to that. And it was recognizing the fact that we had a system that currently was very fragile. And so we broke it really into 2 things, one of which, how do we provide emergency relief? I believe Lamoille County Sheriff was getting a huge increase in calls as a result of what was happening with the current structure. So we've got a whole host of issues around. Some are paying, some are not paying, but we have a sort of a certain urgency. And I think that does contribute to the difficulty, and that is how do we respond to the fact that we want to keep our system going, and the shorter term decisions and how they might need to move forward and not be as ideal in the overall long-term planning. And so I think the very fact that I feel very strongly that we need to give the technical support to this initiative. It is complex, and people have different opinion about, whatever. Take comfort in the fact that none of this money, even if we authorize it for the short term, is going to go out. And maybe the amendment needs to be, or the motion needs to make it very clear. But we need to have the 2 positions, and no money goes out without meeting the requirements. Now, it says, the motion says, as explained in the grant plan. So I just want to make sure that we actually have the assurances that even with if we were to authorize both the positions and the money to respond, because that was our intent, recognizing the urgency of the situation and allowing a longer term process to move forward. So I just want to reiterate, and Senator Sears, if my memory is not correct about why we did this, please speak up. But I would like to make sure that our motion, if we move it forward, is very clear that, as explained in the grant plan, means that no money would go out to these entities without meeting the requirements. So that's my comment. I want to move this discussion forward. It's long, it's complex, it's beyond what we're going to be able to do today. But I do want to say, remember, we know we've got a system that is very stretched, and we wanted to make sure that if something was needed more immediately, we had the ability to respond. And I realize that some people may say that's not perfect, and I would agree with that, but it may be expedient and necessary. So Senator Steers, speak up if I am remembering incorrectly.
And
he may not be there.
I'm pausing to see if he is.
He's on.
Yeah, okay. So I think
I'm ready to move. I'm ready to move.
But I just want to make sure that we're clear about two things. One, we've talked about, and I'm am sensing a consensus about the need for additional technical assistance and project management. I want to be clear if these are positions and you're also asking for limited service. That's what I thought, but we're calling them positions. But in fact,
it's contracts.
Yeah. So that we're enabling you to contract for those two services.
Yeah.
So that's one piece. And then the second piece is that whether or not we should release the funding for 5 entities to move forward. Commissioner, your memo to us asked for the authority to be flexible to move if some of those are not ready to go, to be flexible. But that's not the way we have drafted this, that it would be just for the approval of the 5 that are above the line. I am fully expecting that there will be a conversation in the Appropriations Committee and probably the subject matter committees about this. And if there's a need to allocate additional money, that we would be dealing with that through an appropriation process. When the legislature is here. I would also just like to note that if we don't move forward with the funding of the 5 entities as proposed by DPS, we ought to think about what the timeline is, because I am assuming that, well, maybe something could come to us at a JFC meeting that we'll probably have in December. Otherwise, it's into the appropriations process, which means nothing will happen until March or so if we manage it in the BAA. So I just want folks to understand kind of the consequence of maybe delaying projects.
And that's why I wanted to remind or go back to those of us who were involved in this discussion earlier.
Okay. So,
ma'am, may I ask a quick question?
Yes.
If you authorize the money above the line, and let's just theoretically say that Chittenden County said, we can't move forward within 12 months. We can't do it, so don't give us the money. Would that money be allowable to be transferred to, say, Rutland County if they identified more needs, but they were able to move quickly? I just want to make sure I understand if we have any flexibility at all in the way it's structured. And I do also want to say thank you, Senator Kitchell, because the timely release of money really is going to help us avert an increasingly stressed system from cracking. And please, I know this is not perfect. I put that out there, but we can't let perfect get in the way of progress.
Well, we've got to give some flexibility, and to run it through the whole legislative budget process is difficult. I don't know whether we can do it through another joint fiscal committee meeting or what the mechanism to act more nimbly, because I do think, we probably do need that flexibility. And I don't know if we have anybody here from, maybe we could look at this, how it's written, and modify
Well,
something.
Let's find out what we want to do.
And then-
And then we'll figure out. So let me break this in half.
Because we're still talking about that original tranche of money here.
Yeah.
It's just flexibility around it,
Within that.
as opposed to the larger funding.
Let me just begin with, is there a consensus on the need to release funding to support contracting for project management and technical services?
Yes.
So we generally have consensus on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to
Senator
ask, how
Weston,
long will that take?
to get out the door. Commissioner, did you hear that? How long will it take to get the contracts out the door for that technical services?
Probably at least 30 days to do the paperwork to get an RFP on the street.
30 days for, to get the RFP on the street, and then responses back will be when?
Probably 60 days before we could offer a contract to someone. And that's moving at lightning speed for state government, Fred.
Yep, so we're talking February.
Yeah.
Maybe March.
No, I don't think it'll be that long. I think we're in a pretty good place to be able to put the RFP out in under a month, and we will fast track the review of the applications.
The end of January.
Yeah.
And then you've got a grant, okay? February.
That's still a faster schedule than putting it through the whole.
Which would also have to be.
I'm just trying to
Okay,
think of it.
so the second half of the question, so we have consensus about the services. The second half of the question is, should funding be released? And in this instance, it's for the 5 that are so-called above the line. They indicated specific grant amounts. So maybe that's one, is this the right amount? And 2, do you wish to allow them the flexibility to move around within that total sum of $2,010,000? So
And that is all contingent that they meet the requirements that.
Right.
Of the
RFP, correct.
Before, I see some people saying yes, but we also have questions. Senator Baruth?
Yes, and a question. I'm assuming that's excluding the additional flexibility for the 230, and that's going to be a later question.
230.
That's for the 2 positions.
That would have been over.
italicized.
Positions.
230?
Language.
So the
Position for 260.
Well,
I'm getting confused on what I'm seeing is 260,000 for the 2
For the 2
positions.
positions.
And then an additional 2,010,000 for those 5 entities.
Correct.
For what I assume to be a total of 220.
They were also asking for an additional 230,000 as a just in case amount of money to be able to fund it. That's
Okay, that's not, so
That's
we're working off of
separate question.
same
separate question.
Okay, so if you read over here, but what our motion, so we've drafted a motion to release the 2,272,000 that split in the 2 ways I've described, does not include an additional 230. Thank you for that catch. Committee, what's your pleasure? And Senator Kitchell is working hard here. Representative Kornheiser.
I think it makes sense to release the money in order to release the burden on the state police, which are at a crisis point. I absolutely get my head around that. And within that, being flexible with that funding is perfectly fine with me. I will remain very concerned that we are reacting in an emergency fashion and putting money towards a problem that doesn't seem like we have a holistic view of a solution. And I don't want releasing this money to create sort of a determined path towards that solution when that solution hasn't really been fully fleshed out. And so I just want to say it's okay with me if we put this money towards this solution and then in a year wind up moving towards a totally different solution. That this doesn't have to be sort of a deterministic path. This is a emergency solution. And I just need to say that in order to feel okay about releasing this level of funding towards it. Because it's possible that a fairly chaotic regional dispatch system won't meet the needs of all Vermont communities in a way that works.
Thank you. And I have to say, you're expressing a concern that I have, and I can't speak for other people, but I'm generally seeing some nods of just about concern. But we're not going to get it perfect today, and there is some urgency in moving forward. And so I think we need to begin moving forward.
Yes.
Rep. Fagan.
Thank you. Completely concur. And one other piece, when the commissioner talked about recruiting and retention, I've done recruiting and retention for forever. It's damned hard. And especially the retention piece. And if the folks at the PSAPs are sitting there kind of, help is on the horizon, they'll stick it out. But if they see no hope of help being on the horizon, more will leave. And when more leave, more will leave. So completely concur, and that's the reasoning behind. Thank you, Commissioner, for making that comment. It really struck a chord with me. So thank you. And Madam Chair, I'm going to ask that somebody read the motion, and what I'll do is I'll attach it to the vote, because I'm not going to be able to write it. We'll be here till this afternoon, which is as of a week ago. We are
as described in the memo of.
Does that give the flexibility?
Wednesday.
Going to deal with the additional funding in a separate motion?
I'm a little. Yes.
Okay.
Let's try to make this simpler, and I'm getting concerned about time.
Yeah.
So I think we've got agreement. We want to provide the technical support, contracting ability, and that's $260,000. We want to release up to $2,010,000 for the 5 projects, and we want to provide the flexibility to move money around within those 5 projects and give the commissioner discretion to do that.
Well, maybe we're better off to not say 5 projects, but to fund projects that meet the requirements.
Okay, up to that amount.
Up to that amount. And then that gives you the flexibility, but it's all contingent that whatever gets funded meets those requirements that have been identified.
And if we do that, it sort of nullifies the need for the
That
attendance.
230.
230,
Yeah.
okay.
So I think maybe that would be the better way to move this.
I think what I heard the commissioner say, and I'll look at it, is if you've got another project down there that needs to buy a $500,000 piece of equipment, and somebody says, well, we can't use $250,000, but that, if all the needs above the line are met, you've got extra, but you don't have enough to do another project below the line or somewhere else in there, that you needed that extra cushion, that you didn't have $250,000 not being used.
I think the motion would address that because we're not getting into specific 5 specific projects.
It's the amount of money. And I'll look to the commissioner, was I hearing that correctly, that you wanted to have the ability to use some additional money if that's what was needed to move another project forward?
Yes, ma'am. The reason we wrote it that way is that if the amounts were sticky to a project, if the finite amount was attached to a project, that if the smallest project above the line, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, if they were the one that said, oh, we can't meet the 12-month timeline, that wasn't going to be enough to support the next, say, the town of St. Johnsbury's project. So that's why we had asked to have that extra $230,000 was in case a project that didn't move forward was at the very low end, we would still be able to move forward with a project below the red line that cost more.
So in essence, what you want is a total authority to expend 2.5 million.
Of the initial 6.5 million, that's correct.
So that's the question. Do we want to move it to expend up to 2.5 million from the funds appropriated, give the 260 for project management, and the remainder would be for projects that are compliant with the requirements that have been established
in the request for proposal
in the RFP.
All right. I believe Senator Kitchell just made a motion.
I think I did.
Do folks understand that we need a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Senator Westman. People understand what we're doing, so we've changed this a wee bit. People understand. Are you ready for the question?
I have a question.
Yeah, Senator Sears.
Two questions. One is we're approving 2.5 million, right?
Correct.
And not 2,010,000. And so would there be a report to the Joint Fiscal Committee of any expenditures above the those 5 ranked programs?
So, excellent point. Let's set that. We'll make that request. Let's don't have it as part of the motion. I'm just trying.
No, I didn't. I wanted to make sure that we would be notified if there's any change in the spending.
Yeah. Commissioner, so you'll inform us 100%. And she's saying yes. Yeah.
You will know where all of it went.
The second question is, I'm not sure that I'm able to vote under the rules. So, but just for the record, I would support the motion, but I don't think I can vote.
Thank you, Senator Sears. In fact, you are not allowed to vote. But thank you for your help and us understanding this. So we have a motion that's been seconded. Folks have indicated they understand it. So I think we're ready for the roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rep. Ansel is absent. Senator Bruce.
Yes.
Rep. Briglin.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Rep. Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Rep. Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is on Zoom. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Rep. Hooper.
Yes.
We are 8-0.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, committee and others for helping us get through there. I think we've arrived at a good place with what we had to work with.
With a lot more to be done.
With a lot more work to be done.
Can I just correct one little thing? We're actually 8-0-2.
8-0-2.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much.
I didn't want Senator Sears laughing at me again.
Inability to count. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I think it's 8-1-1. 8011. Zoom is different from not
Don't get me confused.
Yeah. So thank you all. We are running late and we are now ready to hear from Deputy Secretary Farnham with an update on the ARPA SFR lost revenues.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks for joining us.
So for the record, Douglas Farnham, Deputy Secretary, Agency of Administration. I want to first start out by apologizing to the committee for not getting the materials in advance of the session. I'm primarily working from 2 documents that were shared with no notice. And one version was publicly released before this, but again, I apologize for the late release. Diving into it, the term, the Treasury calls it revenue loss replacement. It is an extremely misleading term. So the first thing to start from is that our federal award for state fiscal recovery is 1.05 billion, and nothing has changed in that amount. So the amount of money of available state fiscal recovery is exactly the same. And through the end of the last legislative session, the legislature had appropriated 1.048 approximately billion. So the ARPA funds are appropriated at the state level, essentially fully appropriated with a small reserve, an unstated reserve, I guess. And this revenue loss replacement eligibility is being used to implement programs more closely to the state legislative intent. So it doesn't allow the administration to change the nature of a program. That's not what's happening. It's really a tool for navigating the federal assistance. So in one of the longer documents that I shared, I forget the electronic title of it, but it's 8 pages, I believe, or 6 pages. At the very end of it is Appendix 2, and there's a graphic in there that shows the 4 key eligible use categories for Treasury. And in July, Treasury released new guidance, which before this guidance, we had evaluated revenue loss, but it did not appear that Vermont would be able to take advantage of the revenue loss eligibility category. So we had a $10 million de minimis threshold that we were eligible for. And of course, when talking about $1 billion, $10 million doesn't really enter into the discussion in a meaningful way. After this July guidance and after we analyzed it and searched for some technicalities that we found in that guidance that were extremely helpful to Vermont's individual situation, we were able to run a calculation on the annual comprehensive financial review audited receipts and identify that Vermont in fact has, based on the new guidance, we had 242 million of revenue loss capacity that could be put into this green block on the right-hand side, essentially, of these eligible use categories. So instead of having to justify the program as public health or premium pay or water or sewer, essentially we were able to put it in this other category, which has dramatically reduced eligibility criteria, has a handful of prohibited uses, like you can't put it towards pre-existing debt or pensions, or a very small list of what we can't do. And for by and large, allows the program to function as if it were general fund with some caveats. But a very impactful element is that the revenue loss capacity has to be tracked and reported to Treasury at the state level, at the program level. But then the awards we actually give to a beneficiary or subrecipient are considered state money. They don't show up on a CFA. It's scheduled expense finding. No. Yeah. Basically, it doesn't officially show up on the federal funds radar for those organizations, which is really extremely helpful. It doesn't have a lot of the same uniform guidance requirements. And then, so that's an administrative element that's helpful. But for some of our programs, like weatherization programs at the Public Service Department, the state legislature passed the program with the intent of funding what Vermont considers moderate income, which is 80% of AMI to 120% of AMI. Treasury defined moderate income as 60%, 65% of AMI, which is not a definition used anywhere else in the civilized world for moderate income. So it is completely understandable that there was a definitions mismatch in what we considered moderate income. And this revenue loss allowed us, Department of Service, Public Service, home electrical and heat pump was on our second round of approvals for revenue release. So what we did was, once we learned we had this eligibility category, and our process right now is to look at every program that comes in centrally. It comes to AOA. We evaluate the risks in that program, and we collect an 11-page questionnaire from a program, and they tell us how they're going to design the program. I work with Guidehouse, and we tell them, okay, you can design it this way, but you have to mitigate these risks, and you have to set your program up with these federal criteria. We now have a separate process where it's only a 4 or 5-page questionnaire for revenue loss. And if an appropriation is deemed eligible for use and revenue loss, it's an expedited program design. And at that point, basically the guidance to the program consists of you have to follow Vermont law. And with these few caveats related to permitted expenses, but the state legislature did not authorize any of those prohibited uses anyway. So it's moot. We still tell people, but it's completely moot. So at this point, out of the 242 million, we have deployed just over 200 million in authorizing these programs to function as the state legislature intended. And in a couple of places, we've had to do that in very strategic ways. Instead of converting the entire appropriation for like the COVID-19 paid sick leave program, we found a path to eligibility for one portion that program was intended to serve, one population, but we did not, there were like 3 main lanes in that program, and we could only authorize one of them under the initial rules. So we authorized another 5 million of revenue loss to allow for employees that did not receive paid. They took time off, but they weren't paid for it. And we would have had to income test them, which would have snowballed administratively and made it untenable for DFR. So we approved 5 million of revenue loss, and we're currently evaluating how that can be deployed alongside the phase 1 of that program that we launched. Most of these other programs, they had eligibility issues. They had a higher federal risk. And some of them, we were not able to sufficiently achieve legislative intent. And so that's where the bulk of the 170 million was considered high impact. Like it was either massively administratively burdensome, the legislative intent wasn't even coming close to being achieved, or those were really the main 2 drivers of the decision. Or actually in some of the housing programs, speed of implementation and the overwhelming need for housing to move quickly was part of the decision to reduce some restrictions on the housing related investments. And the involvement of private parties with federal funds always creates some complexities. So the second round, we took care of a lot of the medium and smaller appropriations. One thing that is not on either of these 2 documents is that another $5 million for load management. There's a $2 million load management at the bottom of this separate 1-page document. There was $5 million passed under the interim final rule that was never implemented. It was kind of, we produced a design that the Public Service Department couldn't quite implement. So it's tied to this 2 million. So another 5 million has been authorized there. And we're currently working with VSAC. I met with them yesterday afternoon, actually, looking at, you'll notice there were 4 Department of Health appropriations for various forgivable loan and loan repayment. One of those that went to VSAC was converted. The other one is a $1.5 million for mental health professionals. That was deemed eligible on the front end. We found a path to eligibility. But as we talk more with VSAC about the conversion to a loan, that structure is not working very well. So we were going to try to replace part of the appropriation. I'm not certain if we're going to have to replace part or a whole. I'm circling back with my team after this, I'm probably going to have to tell them to reschedule. But we are actively looking at that appropriation. And then that will leave right around 30 million of capacity. And we're looking at ways we can either tweak some other programs to get them closer to legislative intent or get them moving along faster. But I think the most important element of all this is that, this is also, the 242 million is confirmed, verified amount from prior fiscal years. So there is no uncertainty in that. If economic projections come true, there's a possibility for additional revenue loss based on some forecasts right now, which don't look great for Vermont. The small silver lining would be additional revenue loss capacity would allow us to simplify some of our federal programs. And with a revenue loss program, the risk of not expending the funds it's subject to the same expenditure timeline at the high level, but the rules are simplified in such a way that the risk of actually losing that money and having to return it to the federal government is essentially nullified. Because the money is considered expended when the state pays it out to a third party, not when the project is completed. So it's much easier to expend the revenue loss funds and make sure that that money is never recaptured by Treasury. So that was also in some of the housing projects where we've got long-term time constraints. That was another reason for leveraging this flexibility there. So I apologize if I jumped around a little bit. Happy to take questions, Madam Chair, or revisit some areas that I may have skipped by a little bit too quickly. I'm sometimes living too closely to this.
You 24/7, I think, is how you're living it. Senator Kitchell.
Well, I just want to say, I know to do this is required a tremendous amount of work. And this combined with what you're doing with the ERAP has meant that you've gone back and looked at a lot of expenditures. And so having this flexibility, even in small ways, like the AHEC programs, just were a forced fit without the flexibility. So I know that this money that's carved out, and it took us a while to understand, it's not new money, it's just out of that ARPA money. We have this much flexibility, so it really has, I just want to recognize the amount of work that it's taken to get us here, but it certainly has helped address program design and eligibility as it was intended. So this is more of a comment. Thanks for what you've done, your staff.
His staff, sadly, is him and one or two other people.
Well, it's right there commensurate with our staff, right?
Yeah. Representative Bricklin.
I want to echo that. This seems like magic to me because I know some of these programs were really, a lot of effort was put into this to try and shoehorn these programs into some of the guidance and what we thought was going to be the eligibility requirements. So this is a huge relief on a couple of these in particular that I've worked on or my committee worked on. A question that I have is going forward, is it possible, because, and I'm thinking very specifically about Act 172, which was the Municipal Energy Resilience.
No, H5.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
H518.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. We had done so much work to try and shoehorn the requirements of that program of what we thought were going to comport with the Treasury guidance. Is there any possibility looking forward to the next biennium of potentially loosening some of the strings on some of these programs to, maybe meet, more flexibility in terms of, what the legislature would really like to accomplish in some of these programs? Again, a lot of flips and twists were done in some of the program design here that was, thought through in legislative committees in the last year. Again, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not going to be here next biennium, but something that whether it's the administration or the relevant committees in the legislature might want to think about how to loosen some of the constraints of these programs. Just a thought, so anyway, but I also appreciate the work you've done.
Representative, I would say the primary driving criteria at this point is just the state statute. So if the legislature chooses to make adjustments to these programs, that's not going to conflict with the revenue loss eligibility. It wouldn't.
Yeah.
I think that the main consideration would be if the tweaks are going to change commitments the state has already made, that would be difficult.
Sure.
But I do think the rollout of that using the Municipal Energy Resilience Program as an example, I believe that program is going to take some time to roll out and is involving a lot of coordination with the RPCs. So yes, I do think the legislature did not have the benefit of this during the discussions on how to deploy the funds. So I anticipated that you would want to reevaluate programs that have been, hopefully just to say, if there were some restrictions that you only put in there to match the federal eligibility, if the state legislature wanted to remove those, then it wouldn't cause any severe disruptions.
The funds, the use of the funds are still time limited. They have to be allocated, by 26? So we need to attend to that.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes and no, it's complicated. Let me see if I can speak English here. They still have to be obligated by 12/31/2024. So the 2024 legislative session would be the last opportunity to make major decisions about how this money is going to be obligated if any changes and directions were made. And then they still have to be expended by 12/31/2026. However, even though they're using the same words for revenue loss, the meaning of the term expended is much
It's
different.
That's your point.
Right.
You made that point earlier.
Yeah, so I would think for revenue loss, does it mean that Vermont could make decisions in 2025 about how to reallocate these funds? Probably not, right? We still want all of the decisions to be finalized in 2024 to protect the state.
Okay.
But we're moving into 2023, so still have time.
Yeah. We probably should move to the next topic. I don't know if you were here when the deputy auditor was presenting single findings, and he mentioned the labor issue, particularly with folks who do your sort of work. I really hope that you are making sure that you're properly staffed to do this. I mean, you had a job before this new work was placed on top of it. And I'm just deeply concerned that this is a particular area where Vermont will be better served if you have sufficient staff to do this work. And I hope that we'll see in the budget that's presented that staffing levels are commensurate with the work to manage this money.
Madam Chair, I would say that, yes, I was glad that I was here and I caught that section of Mr. Ash's testimony. There's a couple areas I can share some insight which may help the committee there. All of the limited service positions that have been created for ARPA specifically over the last several years, there's, I believe, over 100 at this point. We've been working with finance and management to track those, to monitor people's success in filling them. And I think the biggest difficulty we're facing right now is separating the 2 to 4 year spike in workload and pressure. And it flows over, right? All of this ARPA funding has created knock-on effects for a lot of staff. So separating that short-term spike in workload from the long-term, what we would consider, more appropriate for base increases. So I've been spending a lot of time on that as well, monitoring the success of filling those limited service positions. The priority, as always, should be filling limited service positions and then evaluating the need to go to contracted services if we have a demonstration that we are not able to fill those needs through limited service positions. So we have been looking at options there, and I share Mr. Ash's concern about making sure we can alleviate that pressure and make sure our compliance and monitoring. I do want to make sure we don't spend more on the cure than the disease. So we have to balance the cost of re-auditing and the risk to our ACFR against how much it would cost to achieve a perfect state in the financial world. I don't think Vermont can necessarily afford right now, but I want to try to take care of 80 to 90% and get us into an acceptable level of compliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So we should move on. And so I think you're going to be joined by Dr. Chen and Ms. Lazarus. Yeah. So Dr. Chen, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, but you can see that we've had conversations. You know how it works. So we'll turn this, now we are turning to the item on the agenda, the Emergency Rental Assistance and Transitional Housing Program. members, you would have received probably this morning a proposal for the ERAP. And I'm not even going to let you start talking and explain what happened and why we're considering this now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I won't belabor it. Apologies again for the last minute documentation. So what happened with ERAP is in the memo that I did share, a kind of attempt to lay out the background and the flow over the last year and a half of how we got to where we are today. So I won't go through the entire background, but of course the significant events were very challenging Treasury guidance that was released in March of this year, caused us to have to pivot immediately in how we were approaching spending in ways that we couldn't fully explain during the session. In August, the administration announced some programmatic changes to make sure that we would have enough ERA 2 funding to last through the winter. And then in September, Treasury released some guidance that after we peeled it apart a little bit, we found, okay, well, we can use this guidance now to reverse some of the damage that the March guidance did to Vermont and restore some of the funding capacity to the ERA 2 fund. So for a long time, I've been saying, the March guidance put Vermont in a position where we might end up returning between $30 and $50 million, and I'll make it as small as possible, but we're in a very difficult position. I don't see a way around it. The September guidance changed it so that now I believe I can fully reconcile the ERA 1 fund and fully expend the $168 million. The reason this memo was so late is that I was still receiving files trying to perform the payment swap of about 15,000 payments in one of our programs to substantiate and effectuate that financial swapping. So that's why right now some of these items don't have final dollar numbers, is that we are still trying to pull off that transfer. And we believe we have validated data at this point. We are confident we'll be able to report to Treasury by the 17th on what our final numbers look like for ERA 1. And that will tell us, okay, what have we now spent in ERA 2 and how much capacity do we have remaining in the ERA 2 funding? In general, that is going to free up between $30 and $37 million of funding. And there's also some wiggle in that because since the last projections we produced, we've made changes to our assumptions about administrative costs. We've had thousands of new applications come in to the VRAP program in September, and we had to go through a lot of those to figure out, okay, how many of these are legitimate applications? How much of this will we be likely to pay out? So the good news is, since the August and September event, we will have significantly restored financial capacity in ERA 2. In digging through the history of this grant and from the initial acceptance and then 2 items that were legislatively appropriated, I believe the administration does need to document for the Joint Fiscal Committee. So this is an attempt to document how we intend to deploy that restored spending, but we also do need to present you with, this is the budget for ERA 2, and this is what we believe needs to be spent of the $152 million of ERA 2 funds. That is dependent on the reconciliation that we're currently doing. So I'm hopeful we can present you with a as final as possible budget with a program this large and that fluctuates as rapidly as this program does. Well, when I say this program, I mean it's a fund with 5 programs in it. Actually 6 now, I think. But are there any questions on some of the context and background before moving into the line items? And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I also want to say the administration is not asking for an action item today. We're not asking for anything to be approved right now. So we understand there are hearings being scheduled related to housing that might flow into the committee's evaluation of this proposal.
So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and I alluded to this an hour ago when we were talking about possibly needing to schedule another joint fiscal committee meeting. As Mr. Farnham noted, to appropriate these funds or reappropriate these funds, it requires an action of the joint fiscal committee. And so we will need to reconvene. We wondered if we could do that remotely, but the determination is no, we need to be here as a joint fiscal committee. It's different than how we handle grant requests. We have the ability to manage via email. So we're going to hear in a moment what the administration is proposing for the 30 plus million and how it fits in with the whole plan. The House Human Services Committee and the Senate, what are you, General? No.
Welfare.
Health and Welfare Committees. Oh, Senator Cummings, you will get to go to another committee.
I filled out the doodle.
Economic
but
development.
I'm not sure when we're meeting.
We'll be there too. So there is going to be scheduled a meeting of those two committees it is scheduled on November 18th. So they will also hear and take testimony on this proposal, I'm sure from the administration, but I think also with community partners. And then based on that, working within the money box that we have, the Joint Fiscal Committee will then act on allocating this money. And we'll do, as I mentioned earlier, we'll do a doodle poll to make sure we can get everybody here. So sorry, and I'm repeating some of that, but I just want to make sure that we're all clear and understanding why we're hearing about this and what the process for decision making is going to be. So back to you, I think probably back to Dr. Chen. Or not. Back to you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was an excellent summary. And I think one of my intentions is to, when we file the final ERA 1 quarterly report, we would be bringing that back to as part of this joint fiscal approval to say, because 200 million was initially authorized after recaptures and some subsequent appropriations, one appropriation of ERA 1, there was never a reconciliation to kind of put the right numbers in the right places. So I think it's important that we publicly and transparently state this is how ERA 1 ended up being allocated. And then in addition to that, this is how the 152 million of ERA 2 is going to be allocated. There's one stumbling block with ERA 2 is that 15 million of ERA 2 was legislatively appropriated, meaning we would have to wait until the BAA to actually adjust that number. But only 10.5 of it is going to be used for reach up.
I just want to be clear. The 15 million is a different 15 million, the general fund that we set aside.
Yes, Senator, there are two 15 millions.
Okay, because that adds more, when you have multiple 15s, I just want to make sure that.
So what is the 15 that we appropriate?
Yeah, can you refresh our memory?
So 15 million of general fund was appropriated.
We know that.
We know
for
that.
Emergency housing.
And then another 15 million was of ERA 2 specifically was appropriated to DCF for reach up.
Oh, yes, okay.
And only 10 and a half, maybe 11 will be needed for that purpose. So part of the reconciliation would be to approve a plan with the intent of this 15 million being formally adjusted in the BAA.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
And that'll just be a little bit of a complexity that we want to manage.
And that's helpful because those families are the absolute poorest families.
Yes.
So, okay.
And that line item is in all of our planning has not been reduced. The Reach Up assistance has been maintained at full eligibility up to the federal terms, right, through June 30th.
That's good.
All right, so moving into the 5 proposed uses of the restored spending capacity. And I'll probably be kicking a couple of these over to my colleague, Dr. Chen. The first one is, during the legislative session, we disclosed plans to spend $15.2 million of ERA 2 on housing stability services. It was discussed, it was supported. It was never formally documented either in an appropriation or a JFC approval. But I think we had consensus on that being a good use of the funds. And when DCF did an amazing amount of work recently to engage with community partners, and Katerina Lazayas was instrumental in that outreach and engagement with our partners. This use of the funds in housing stability services, which includes eviction prevention, mediation, keeping landlords, and it was really agreed upon by all parties that this was a very valuable use of the funds. And when we had to adjust our spending projections, we only were able to allocate 2 years of housing stability services in the budget in August. And this $5 million would go back to, okay, this 15.2 will be a fully funded element. We can only fund up to 15.2 million. There's a federal limitation on housing stability services. I think it would be a different conversation if there wasn't a 10% cap in that area. But I do think the plans that DCF and DHCD have also kind of maximize the capacity in our community partners to provide these services. So I don't know that even if there was a higher federal cap, if more could be spent in that area. Dr. Chen, I don't know if there's anything to add there.
Well, I just want to underscore the efforts for community outreach that really helped us devise this list. We had 14 meetings with the community. Most of them were regional, 2 of them were statewide. We engaged probably 300 attendees, 96 community organizations, and we really did, we presented to them various options, and we had them by polling tell us what their priorities were, and you really will see them here reflected in how we decided to spend this money. And I'd say, housing stability services was on the top of everybody's list.
Moving on to item 2, if there are no questions, Madam Chair.
I'm not seeing any, so yes, please.
So this one can be confusing. It took me a while to straighten this one out in my head. But for the ERA 2 funding, for the $352 million that originally came in, $36 million of that was appropriated to the Emergency Rental Assistance 1 funds. At this point, it looks like we used, based on timing, and FEMA, we were using FEMA for about $100 million of that expense before we switched to emergency rental assistance on July 1. We only used somewhere in the low 20s of that $36 million of legislative appropriation of ERA 1. I had, in the budget I was maintaining for ERA 2, I had booked, basically carrying that legislative intent forward, $36 million of ERA 2 to this purpose for transitional housing, transitional and emergency housing. So in the adjustments, the financial adjustments we made in August, that $36 million was maintained. There was, in this proposal, we want to use $12.6 million of the restored capacity to fully fund what we expect it to cost to maintain transitional housing through March and emergency housing through June. So that $12.6 million would bring the total amount in the ERA 2 budget of $152 million. 48.6 of it would be for transitional housing. The really valuable knock-on effect of that is that it removes most of the pressure, not all of the pressure, on the general fund appropriation of $15 million that DCF has. And of course, I would defer to Dr. Chen on how DCF is planning to deploy that capacity, but being general fund and with the statutory purposes that were laid out in that appropriation, DCF can use that money much more creatively, much more quickly. It is limited to, of course, responses to the emergency housing situation and homelessness prevention and mitigation. But it is, so this 12.6 would essentially go to make sure we're spending as little as possible of that general fund appropriation.
And I would just add that the primary goal of that funding is for more medium and long-term solutions, because we know the GA and the transitional housing will get us through this year, but then obviously we have to decide what's the future look like. And then the last two items really will be, what's the slope of the off-ramp from the transitional housing program? How steep will it be? Will it be a cliff? And so the goal is to make it as gentle as possible, but also understanding that it needs to be a bridge to what the future brings in terms of medium and long-term solutions.
And when you refer, you're using the 15 million in GF to general fund to provide that slope.
Some of that is in the rental assistance program, number 3, and number 4 immediately, and then to reduce that slope, but then the rest will go towards some of those medium and longer term solutions.
And has thought been given to what I think all of us are believing about the needs that we're going to see this winter with folks who are unhoused, and there are not service providers who can support them. So where does that fit in there?
Well, we're already planning for that, and that is the general assistance. That's the adverse weather.
Yeah.
And that's the increased shelter capacity. Planning for this.
Yeah, can you expand on that, perhaps, what
we're concerned about is that our shelters are full. And I know a couple of years ago, we had a church that would provide shelter, but they needed money for a shower. So the question we've been batting around is, some of that 15 million actually going to be necessary to address emergency housing services that could be provided by either the charitable community or other organizations to bring more capacity online. And I guess that's what we're trying to understand.
So part of our current activities include shelter expansion around the state, including the Northeast Kingdom. The Elmwood Pond project is coming up hopefully next month. And we're partnering with domestic violence organizations to increase their capacity into the current GA emergency housing program. And then we're working with partners in Central Vermont to support, and the city of Montpelier to support additional shelter capacity somewhere in Central Vermont.
And that 15 million would help fund those activities?
We actually have money in our budget right now to fund those facilities because we need it up for this winter. So those are ongoing activities happening right now. What we see is we will have a full plan for that 15 million. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
We will need part of that money to serve people who are not eligible in the ERAP eligibility during the winter and during the next part of the fiscal or the full fiscal year. So we want to reserve some of that for the GA program to make it through the fiscal year, including the adverse weather conditions policy when how that's implemented. And then the remaining of that money is an ongoing conversation. We're getting the changes as quickly as we can to adapt, but we see that as additional shelter capacity being an important part of that. As Dr. Chen just mentioned, the medium and long-term supports is something that money can help us invest in because it's so flexible.
So I would ask that, so you're presenting to us the general concept of the ERAP money. For us to understand the deployment of this the new deployment or the new thinking around this ERAP money, we need to see how the 15 million in general fund dollars that have been allocated are going to be deployed. And I would guess that adjacent to that is then also a description of how you're using your current budget, you know, the GA and what you just described as being able to be deployed so that we can see the full plan, not just a slice of it, and we can understand kind of what that means to our communities and to the people that we're trying to make sure is served as well as possible. And we need to know the GF and the already appropriated money in order to consider what you're proposing for the ERAP. So they need to be put together. I understand they're different pots, but we need to see them as a whole. Braided, there we go.
Understood.
Yeah,
Understood,
thank you,
Chair.
yeah.
I think it's completely reasonable. I do think and I actually placed an unfair amount of pressure on DCF to try to get everything pulled together, just the timelines we've been working under. I think the one reason I'm still presenting this without the follow-up information about the general fund appropriation is that I think that regardless of the details of DCF's deployment of that 15 million, I think it still makes sense to protect the general fund money. And we've committed to running the transitional housing program until March. If we don't put the ERA 2 towards it, that general fund is automatically consumed to that short-term inefficient use. So I think, yes, understood. But I think regardless, I would highly recommend we fund the emergency and transitional housing with as much ERA 2 as possible.
Our position has always been use your federal dollars first.
That exactly, Senator.
Yeah, I don't think there's any, we just, again, need to see the full picture in order to appreciate the need for deploying a portion of that the way it is. We've got to see the whole thing. Okay, so I think we're ready to move to the next item. So the
next items hopefully are less complicated, but I should never say something like that. The current plan that the administration published was to help households of 30% AMI or lower with 70% rental assistance through March 31st. When DCF primarily, and I was able to attend one or two of those, when we talked to the community partners, lengthening assistance for those households was prioritized over opening the program back up to higher income levels. So we specifically talked about, we have to make hard choices. Should we keep helping the 30% AMI population for a bit longer, or should we help the 30 to 50 or the 50 to 80? And there was pretty strong support for lengthening the support for the 0 to 30 population as the most vulnerable, as the most likely to also eligible for DCF's other programs, to actually increase the expense of the state if we withdrew this support. So this would provide those households with 50% rental assistance for April, May, and June. So it would provide another 3 months of support. The taper there partially being for arriving at the 6.4 million to fit it into the plan, but also partially being that this level of rental assistance, while it's been helpful for many households, is something that Vermont cannot possibly afford to maintain on our own. So going from 70% to 50% was kind of to help people, give them some more time to plan, but also to send the message that this program is still winding down. And then this is a bigger change, number 4. Right now, the VRAP utility program has slightly different criteria. It's still going up to 80% AMI and it's at 70% benefit, but it's scheduled to end on December 31st, especially with the heating oil prices, with all the light disruption recently. We decided to propose to extend the VRAP-U program from January through June, but with the same criteria as the rental assistance program. So effectively, and right now they are 70% benefit. So the main difference there would be the 30% to 80% would not be getting extended. Only the 0 to 30 would be getting extended into next year. It would help us make it through the heating season, and it would help LIHEAP in general. Dr. Chen can correct me, but I've heard that it ends up replacing about 50% of a lot of households' average bills, and a 50%, 70% and then 50% benefit would help those extremely low-income households navigate this winter.
We have crafted LIHEAP to, I believe, provide 50% for the lowest income households of the expected heating costs, and 30% of the next tier of income. And again, these were priorities again of the community partners in the polling we did with them.
So is this, at the E-Board meeting allocated some additional money to LIHEAP, but does that mean you don't need as much of that, or all of it is necessary?
All of it's necessary. Okay. I mean, anyone who's filled their fuel tank, is all of it necessary, and we may need more. I mean, I met with the community action agencies last week, and that was top of their list of what's going to happen when this money runs out. So this really complements
So more homes weatherized so they don't need as much lighting money. Yeah.
They're automatically referred to weatherization services, just as a reminder.
I
for lighting.
I know that, but they're, So thank you.
Just to confirm, everything on this list is really reflective of the prioritization as it emerged from these community.
Yes. Yep. And we're happy to share with the committee a report of the community engagement meetings. You'd like a summary?
Please, I mean, if you can do that electronically, yeah.
I think you might have it in your inbox.
We do have it.
We do have it.
In fact, I have that's what I'm reading. Okay, got it. And we should also make sure that it goes to the House Human Services and Health and General.
Health and Welfare.
Health and Welfare, sorry. Okay. And then the number 5 on the list.
So this is presented as kind of a waterfall concept where as the money is freed up and dedicated, we would fund these concepts with it, and it would be baked into the budget that we present joint fiscal with after the housing hearings and after we've finish our reconciliation. One thing I'd point out, Madam Chair, about this 2.2 million, that is our best estimate based on historical activity. As we know, this winter is anything but consistent with historical activity. So this utility number in particular has a chance to fluctuate, and I want to think of the best way to present it to the committee when we're asking for the formal approval, but it might come in the form of, this being approved as a priority, and that if we might be able to put additional funding toward it if there's a short-term need. And then the last categories in what should work with that is that the last category is intended to be a catch-all to allow for investment of these ERA 2 funds in medium and long-term affordable housing investments. ERA 2 is constrained to be invested in 50% of AMI and lower, I believe. It's not the full 80%, so it does have to be already a little bit lower. So I do think it's also lined up with the current priorities of housing investments that benefit households either experiencing or exiting homelessness. And you could go lower than 50% is the 50% is the cap. So emergency shelters and those types of things, I believe, would qualify under this section as well.
Representative Kornheiser?
Your last half sentence confused me further. So it's okay. Medium and long-term affordable housing investments, it seems like a very broad thing. What does that mean? Is that building housing? Is that vouchers for people to use in market rate housing? What is?
I'm going to here.
I think that will be part of a component of what we're talking about for the 15 million that we want to share with the committee. And then this money is in programs that DCF administers as well as DHCD. So there is some flexibility of that could look like permanent housing, right, for a specific population. And it could be the shelter projects that we need around the state and scaling those in a way that community partners have the bandwidth to stand up at this time.
Okay.
I guess either.
So that would be, so expanding shelter capacity would be a medium term.
Yes,
Okay.
because like, as compared to like the transitional housing program.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Not medium term for the human experiencing it, medium term for the infrastructure of our state.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was the part that I did get my head around.
You know, I'd highlight one of our kind of particularly successful programs for rapidly increasing housing is to actually renovate homes rather than build more homes. And so that's a program that we certainly, if able, we would probably want to consider including.
the way
You run a program that does that as opposed to what the ACCD, it's the VHIP program. Oh,
the VHIP
okay.
program is
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to, I thought maybe I discovered a new thing. No, got it. Okay. So I think we're going to definitely want to see more detail on this proposed 10 million and what it means. Okay.
I just have one question, and at the meeting on the 18th, how fleshed out would be that plan for the 15 and the 10, I guess, is the other question, or is before it comes back to us?
I mean, we would have loved to show you today, so I think the intention is to have that.
Have it available for that.
Yeah.
For that.
Thank you.
I guess we need our invite to that meeting too.
I'm assuming you all will be invited and that this will be the presentation that
Wrote it down.
Yeah. And again, we want to see this sufficiently in advance to be able to put our heads around it and make wise decisions on, how we proceed.
Absolutely fair, Madam Chair. That's why today we were trying to start the conversation. With this one in particular, we knew we were going to need to present a lot more detail. And I'm a housing neophyte, but the way I've been defining medium-term investments for myself is the 3 to 5 year lifespan that are designed to help us get through the exceptional circumstances we're facing. Now, some of it may not be a medium-term problem. There may be some long-term activity. I've actually been talking with some of our consultants about the national housing landscape and how the pandemic has shown a lot of light on a lot of communities. And it's not a new issue in some areas, it's just new information and new emphasis. And so I think separating the medium from the long term will be important. But I think the one thing that we're proposing here, yes, we want to meet the commitment to get people through the winter with transitional emergency housing, but that particular investment, the burn rate is simply too high for us to maintain. So we need to be putting in medium and long-term investments so that we don't need to ever do that again because the expense per household is simply unaffordable.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think
way over time.
Yeah, we are way over time. I think we have gotten the highlights that we need to have. Committee, do you have any further questions for our guests? Not, and we will have lots more opportunities to have this discussion. So thank you for this and kicking this next discussion off. Appreciate you.
Thank you
very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, and I do apologize, committee, that we are so over time. Both of the things that we've taken time on are deep interest to us, but also the communities that we serve, and felt that we needed to do that. So the next item on the agenda is a presentation on the Workforce Recruitment Retention Incentive Grant Program, and Ms. Backus is here. Action item. And it is an action item, so there will be a vote on it.
On the screen.
And Ms. Backus is joining us remotely. Hi, thank you for being here. Why don't you frame this for us and why we're considering this proposal today? And Ms. Backus, to you.
Thank you. My name is Ina Backus. I'm the Director of Healthcare Reform at the Agency of Human Services. Act 83 of 2022 created the Workforce Recruitment and Retention Incentive Grant funding for employees of eligible healthcare and social service employers. And the Agency of Human Services has been administering this program. The program made in total $60 million available, and $45 million was designated for a first round of funding for the specified healthcare employer types. The act specified that the remaining 15 million would be reserved for a second round, pending the identification of additional healthcare and social service provider employees, or employers with a demonstrated need for the recruitment and retention incentive grant funding, and that the agency would make a recommendation about these additional employer types to the General Assembly or the Joint Fiscal Committee if the General Assembly were not in session. So I am here to provide that recommendation at this time and to provide an update on the program and status. It looks like you have slides in front of you, but if it's helpful, I can share my screen.
We have your slides, and so that's not, we're kind of not fans of screen sharing, but we do have your slides.
Great.
And so if you'll just describe which slide we should be looking at, which I begin.
Slide number, it's numbered 2 and is the title Program Overview and Status. So I explained that 60 million was allocated for the healthcare employee retention program. 55 million of those funds were a combination of COVID-19 state fiscal recovery funds and home and community-based services FMAP increase funds. And again, 45 million was designated for a first round that would be focused on specified provider types, and the act specified those provider types. The Agency of the Agency of Human Services has been administering this program. There were 140 first round applicants that qualified for the program and the awards. And in total, we have awarded $33.1 million. Nearly half of these awards were taken under a quarterly disbursement option that allows the grantees or the recipients to issue the premium pay for their employees through June of 2023. This means that we have remaining funds available. Over 26 million is currently available, and that includes 20 million in state fiscal recovery funds. Some notes about the program and administering the program. These funds, the state fiscal recovery funds, are restrictive. I think you've been hearing about some of those restrictions already this morning, but they are restrictive in that they require the work that is performed to have been performed during the public health emergency, which is based on the presidential proclamation. And when you're providing for premium pay consistent with the state fiscal recovery guidelines, the maximum allowable is $13 an hour for employees that have worked during the public health emergency. So that is the maximum additional that can be provided. So with that, I am here to recommend a second round of premium pay funding consistent with the requirements of the Act, and to suggest and recommend these additional healthcare employer types be included in the premium pay program for round 2. These types were not included as eligible employer types in round 1. So now I've turned to slide 3, which is our proposal to expand eligible provider types.
Yeah, we have some questions here.
Maybe we don't understand the second round of premium pay. Are you suggesting that we do a second round of premium pay to those eligible, to that expanded eligible providers? You're not talking about giving more to those that are already qualified in round 1?
That's correct. We are suggesting a second round, and that second round would be available for provider types that were not indicated in the first round and were not eligible in the first round. The providers who were eligible in the first round would not be eligible in the second round.
All right, thank you. The way I was reading it, it created the impression that we were going to give more money to the round 2 providers, but that's not what you're asking for. You're asking that the premium pay, now we use that carved out money of the 60 million would go toward expanding the eligible providers. And could you probably I'm getting ahead of you, Ina, I'm sorry. So why these expanded list was, why this group of providers is being proposed?
Before we get to the why the 4 are being proposed, I think we have some other maybe higher level questions here. Rep. Fagan, Senator Cummings, Rep. Kornheiser.
Thank you. So Ms. Backus, my question, I initially thought that perhaps we could do a second round of the same providers that we did the first round, but it sounds like the $13 per hour that you said maximum cap is allowed. Treasury guidance, I'm guessing you can let us know. Essentially disqualifies the initial tranche of providers that we forwarded money for further retention money. Is that correct?
There is, consistent with Treasury guidance, there would be limitations in terms of the same folks receiving a second round. We also, Act 83, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think they are also limited on the way we wrote the budget that said you can give 2,000. Yeah, not 2 million. No. So they're limited by what we said. Senator Cummings and Kornheiser and.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I know our home health agencies have been struggling financially. And I know they're having retention and attraction and work. Were they covered in the first round? Okay, so what is a high-tech independent home nursing provider?
High-tech independent home nursing providers are nurses that are providing high-tech nursing services in individuals' homes. There are high-tech nursing providers that are included in home health agencies. And so that category would and was included in round 1, where home health agencies have been eligible and have received awards. But there are also high-tech nursing providers that are independent, that are not employed by a home health agency. They don't work in a home health agency. And we are proposing that these independent providers of these very specialized services, not employed by home health, also be eligible for the program.
I guess I am struggling with the term high tech. I see that as remote, services over Zoom? Or are we talking things like arterial catheter, things that it's a higher level of service?
Correct.
Okay, that's all I'm.
Many of them are children, and we call them our $1 million babies.
I think I know one of them that's in Motel 6.
Thanks. Representative Kornheiser.
When you seek to expand the provider types, are you going to, do you plan to still keep it open to the previous eligibility with the understanding that people couldn't be refunded, but there might be people in that pool who didn't apply the first time? And I'm sorry, I'm fading and that sentence might not have been comprehensive.
No, we would not keep it open to the first pool because we have done a lot of work to ensure that those who were eligible in the first round were able to apply. And so we believe that the majority of eligible providers in the first round have had the opportunity and have in fact applied and received awards.
I guess I'm imagining a scenario where there's a provider that's already applied, but there are folks who work for that provider now who didn't work for that provider before. And maybe I don't understand our eligibility as well as I should.
It had to be done during.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's the eligibility I missed.
Yeah. Okay, Senator Burris.
Just to further clarify, maybe on the slide, it says we're expanding the list of eligible providers, which I take to mean adding to the list. But it sounds like you're talking about creating a new list. Which of those is true?
We are creating a new list. I think the terminology expanding eligible providers is in reference to where Act 183 specified that 15 million could be reserved for a second round of funding pending identification of a set of additional healthcare and social service providers and employers.
That still sounds to me as though it was contemplated what Representative Kornheiser was suggesting, that there might be people in the original list who hadn't been hit. So it would seem somewhat unfair to me if you were on in one of the original specialties, didn't get the money, and there's going to be a second tranche of money. You've learned about it, but now you're ineligible.
Well, we may have been too narrowly interpreting Act 83, and certainly we've had very high uptake in round one, and we're proud of that success. But if there were an opportunity to continue to allow those providers that may not have been able to take the opportunity for whatever reason, we could continue the program in that aspect. I think our interpretation may have been that the second phase was for these additional types, and that we would no longer be issuing for the providers that were included in round one. But we're open and able to operate the program in that manner if that's something that the committee prefers.
Speaking only for myself, I think, especially since you say that there would be relatively few from the original specialties who might apply, it would seem more, more equitable to have them continue to be eligible in addition to the new specialties.
I think we were rather explicit in the budget, or in Act 181, that described those categories and what they should do. And I think I actually reached out to, the DAs, the Care Partners who represents the DAs. And they said they were hearing good stories, good uptake. And I took away that there were not concerns that groups of folks had been missed or that there was some inequity here. And in our conversations last year around this, we were quite clear. We wanted to make sure that group was taken well care of, that list was taken well care of, and then created the opportunity to go to these others, which is what they're proposing.
But was it always contemplated, Madam Chair, that there would be a complete replacement of one list with the other?
We've served the one list. It is.
And we're sure that we've served everyone in that?
So that's a question for Ms. Backus, I guess. You feel that you've reached everybody in the first round? Yeah.
We know that there are very few providers that did not apply. We've done even some outreach to those that didn't apply. And again, we have had very good uptake in the program. I could come back to you with some more clear numbers about the uptake in the program if that would be helpful. But by and large, we feel that we have had good uptake from those providers that were included in the round one.
Senator Kitchell.
Well, the other thing is if we have, it seems to me recruitment is really important, and there may be some greater flexibility around funding that's left that can be addressed through the BAA. So it seems like there may be an opportunity. For me, one of the things is we're having difficulty with recruitment and retention because we don't have sufficient workforce and capacity. And so that's that was one of the things we were trying to do in nursing is how do we expand capacity to generate more as opposed to compete with an inadequate supply. So I would say today's discussion, it's good to add additional providers to the group, but if we have some additional money, we could look at it in the BAA context, and it could provide us some opportunity to do some long-term kind of strategic investments to expand the workforce. Because the pipeline is there, eligible students are there, the programs can't accommodate them. So I'm optimistic that even with the expanded group, when we look at the 60 million, we may have some opportunities ahead of us in January.
I guess I'm confused because we keep referring to it as the expanded group, but it's not an expanded group, it's a new group. Right?
It is expanding the list of providers because it was a very long list of specified providers that were covered in round one.
Yep.
So,
but I think the BAA process, as long as
I'm hopeful that we'll have some opportunity there.
Yeah.
Senator West.
So I think I know the answer to this, but for belts and suspenders, and when I see primary care and I see doctor's office, most of the primary care docs in my county are at RFQHC. So they are eligible, correct?
We are proposing that primary care be included in the second phase of funding because primary care was not included in that first large list.
An FQHC would be eligible.
Correct.
Yeah, I thought that's right.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So we've begun discussing the list. Could you just review why you think these four groups are the right four groups to be on the list?
We've been convening with representatives of provider organizations as well as providers working in organizations through our Healthcare Workforce Advisory Committee and our Healthcare Reform Work Group. Through these avenues, we have heard specifically about including primary care practices for this funding to support recruitment and retention of employees, as well as we've heard quite a lot of outreach about dental offices or dental facilities also being included in this program. The high-tech independent nursing providers, I've described why we've identified those at the Agency of Human Services because while some of that group of providers were included in the first round by virtue of being employed by the home health agencies, not all were. And we do know that that is a very important a service and that we want to support that workforce in offering that very specialized service. Further, when it comes the therapeutic community residences, also some of those were included in the first round because they are a part of the designated and specialized services agencies, but there are also independent standalone therapeutic community residents that were excluded from the first round of funding. And we thought we are proposing that those independents be included now in the second round.
Any further questions for Ms. Backus? I had a question asked of me around the support to dental offices, and I think it would also perhaps apply to independent standalone therapeutic community residences, in that the question is essentially, why would we be supporting a dental office that doesn't take Medicaid patients with this degree of pay or an increase in support to their staff? And why don't instead we focus this on just entities that serve Medicaid folks? And as I said, it was in the context of dental offices, but I'm guessing it might also hit community residences. Can you comment on that?
The approach of restricting to providers that do take Medicaid appears to be more restrictive than the intent of Act 183 and the funding sources that have been included in the language of Act 83. So we again, in our interpretation of the legislative intent and of Act 83, wouldn't propose an exclusion to practices that accept Medicaid, or wouldn't propose a parameter that the practice must accept Medicaid in order to be eligible. That wasn't our interpretation of the language of Act 83.
Okay, thank you. Committee, are there any other questions? Again, I'm sorry, folks, that we're running so late. So this is an action item. There's a request to provide support to these additional 4 groups of folk, entities.
Motion to move that?
Yes.
I would do that.
So that would be to expand.
Expand to primary care dentist offices, high-tech independent home nursing providers, and therapeutic community.
Great, thank you, Senator Weston. Is there a second? Senator Baruch seconds it. And I think we're ready to call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rep. Ansell is absent. Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Rep. Briglin.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Rep. Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Rep. Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Sears is on Zoom. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Rep. Hooper.
Yes.
We are 802.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Backus. Thank you, committee. So the next item on the agenda is a status report on pension and other post-employment benefits. Payroll assessment, and Commissioner Gresham is joining us for that. I think we have a report in our packet, and I think we can be rather quick with this.
Is that in order?
Unless you'd like to spend the afternoon with us.
No, I can be rather.
Sun is shining.
Only if he brings lunch.
Afternoon, everyone.
We should be referencing
D4. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
In June of this year, a few months ago, Finance and Management set what we call an employer contribution rate of 26.7%. What that means is for every $100 of payroll, we set aside an additional $26.70 for members of the defined benefit plan. And that sum is intended to cover both the normal cost of retirement benefits, those that are accrued in the current fiscal year, as well as the unfunded liability pay down, state pension plans. It's also intended to cover, due to Act 114, the normal cost and the unfunded liability pay down of the state employees' OPEB plans. So it's intended to cover the entirety of our retirement obligations. This year, in fiscal 23, the current year, our intention through payroll is to raise about $169 million. When that sum, you add to that sum about $1.75 million that we expect will be contributed from towns and sheriffs, and $10 million from the big bill, Section B1100C. We add that sum. The total amount that we intend to raise is $180.7 million, which is exactly what our ADEC contribution this year for state employees is. So as of the last payroll, which is November 3rd, we were tracking very close, in fact, impressively close, being that payroll are an estimate. We were tracking very close to our projected contribution. So in this regard, we're expecting that the $10 million that was set aside in B1100C will be utilized. I'll have a much better grasp of that in the future months, but I think we're okay. So,
thank you. Yeah. Any questions for Commissioner Gresham on this item or on anything else?
Wait a minute, that's
okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And that was just a report. And then the next item is something that we did receive via email since we are meeting today rather than allowing the kind of 30-day time period that has to lapse when we poll ourselves via email. I thought let's put it on the agenda and get this request for a limited service position, a policy advisor for AHS's Adult Protective Services. This will enable us to get it out the door. Mr. Booth from Gordon. But not Gordon Booth. I wonder where I came up with Mr. Booth.
In the treasurer's office.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gordon. Thank you for patiently sitting there.
I was just here for questions.
Yeah, and I know that you're just here for questions, so I'm looking at the committee to see if there are any questions. I am not seeing any, and if someone would care to make a motion, Senator Baruth.
I move the action item favorably.
Okay, and that's to approve one limited service position for AHS's Dale, that's part of a grant they have. Second, Rep. Kornheiser seconds it. Any further discussion? Not seeing any, please call the roll.
Thank you. Rep. Ansel is absent. Senator Bruce?
Yes.
Rep. Brigham?
Yes.
Senator Cummings?
Yes.
Rep. Fagan is yes. Senator Kitchell?
Yes.
Rep. Kornheiser?
Yes.
Senator Sears is on Zoom. Senator Westman?
Yes.
Rep. Hooper?
Yes.
We're 802 approved.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for joining us. And then the next item and final, unless people want to put more on the agenda, is the fiscal officer's reports. Benham, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, or
It is afternoon
now, yes. You have the fiscal officer's report, which has, revenue updates, some updates on pensions, federal funding, which you heard about. I would just draw your attention, there's a list on item number 8 of the studies that our office is working on over the summer, and there's an extensive list. I know some of you are serving on some of the committees, but there is a lot on. I just wanted to draw your attention to that. I'm happy to talk about any of them if you want. And I would also say that we have a new employee starting next Monday. His name is Tim Barnett, and he will be part of the revenue team. And so I hope that I can introduce him in person at your next meeting in December.
Any questions for Catherine on any of this? Thank you for keeping it short and quick. And I'm interested that we are not poaching from state government for Mr. Barnett.
Yes, we are not.
Went to the private sector,
yes.
Nonprofit
sector, yes.
Yeah, great.
When I would say we are still hiring we have 2 positions open for the Senate Appropriations and the budget bill.
Yeah.
And we have applications and it's closed, so we will be interviewing for that.
Yeah. You didn't think that most of what you would do this past year was recruitment and retention.
It is interesting how you started off with that conversation with the auditor, talking about the turnover. I think
we're experiencing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we have I'm very excited and happy with the team we have.
Excellent. Yeah, we have a great team, and it'll be even greater. Okay, folks, any other business for us? Stay tuned for scheduling another JFC meeting within 30 days, and we'll try to find a time that works for everybody. I don't think we have to have a motion to adjourn. We can just adjourn. So